Welcome back and Happy New Year. In this week's episode, I'm talking to David Galley from Sourcing Certification in the US about how he got started in sourcing, the challenges of sourcing in different countries, and how he evaluates tools. This is the Sourcing Challenge Show, and I'm your host, Mark Lundgren. I started off by asking David how he got into sourcing.
All right. Well, I got started in sourcing because I was really bored at my day job. And sorry to my old boss if you ever happen to listen to this. I was doing some, temp staffing. Well, that was my job. I filled temp recs. So there'd be these big companies like big pharma and biotech and chemical industry companies, and they'd get these VMS providers in and get all the sub vendors, and we were one of those. And we'd just fill like dozens and dozens of temp recs for like these underpaid, hard to fill jobs, and that was what I did, and it was really boring. So eventually I was like, how can I work less hard to do this? How can I like get better pipelines? How can I actually have more people? And I started looking around, and I don't know how I found them, but I found things like Glenn Cathy's blog, and I found the Boolean Strings, Irina's blog, and actually the Boolean Strings community on Ning is where I really got started with everything. Just going in and seeing the questions people were asking, like, well, how do I find this? And how do I find that? And answering other people's questions was so much more interesting than making 6 more phone calls or, submitting 3 more people. I mean, I still did the work and I did pretty well at it. I just, my brain wasn't occupied. So I had to find something to engage it. So I started getting involved in these online communities and reading the blogs and commenting and talking back and forth and really just figuring out how to find people better, faster, what strings to run, how things worked, and I loved it. And that's how I got involved in sourcing versus full desk recruiting and exposed to this whole idea that sourcing was even a thing. And this is like 2009, so I think the first couple of SourceCons had just happened. I didn't even know about all that yet, but I was just really getting introduced. So that's how I got started, trying to answer other people's questions, which is largely what I do now. So
You ended up working with Irina. How did that happen from just contributing to the community and then actually working with her?
Well, so for a number of years, Irina did this bi-weekly hangout on the Ning. So in addition to the posts and the forum discussions, there was this hangout chat, and people would come in and talk shop and, what's working for you, what's cool, what are the tools. I mean, almost 10 years ago, we didn't have anything, right? None of the tools we work with now were around, and most of the tools that were around back then aren't anymore. A lot of it was how to run complex Booleans on Google and on LinkedIn, and how to find specific people, how to, surface types of like certain resumes and lists, and, how would you search for this? So early on, it was like really fascinating to me. I listened more than I watched, but after a few of these, I started jumping in and answering questions, saying, "Oh, I would do it this way," or "Here's a neat way you could do that," or "Hey, that's a neat idea, but did you realize you could take it 3 steps further and get something even better?" And just out of that and interacting, I was on there all the time, and Irina reached out to me at one point and said, "Hey, I really like what you're doing. Like you seem to get it, understand what's important. You seem to have good ideas. I'm doing this new thing." So I guess this was actually a couple years later. She started the sourcing certification. So there was all this talk, and SourceCon had grown, had been purchased by Yuri. It was definitely bigger. Sourcing as an idea was more top of mind for a lot of companies and groups. And the problem was everyone was talking about sourcing and no one had a clear definition of what sourcing was. I think that's probably still an issue today. And nobody had an idea what a sourcer did or needed to know. So, Irina's answer was, "Hey, this is what I think you need to know or be able to do. And I have a test, a mechanism to have you prove that you can do this stuff, and I have a training course that attaches to it," and launch the sourcing training and certification in its first format. And she asked me, "Hey, do you want to get involved? Can you help out with this some? I respect your skills and I'd like to work with you." So I said, "Sure, absolutely." And I got started off I helped out on the back end, like I was helping, by this point, I was helping actually host and moderate the biweekly chats, hosted a few and helped run them. And then I started helping grade the tests, the exams for the sourcing certification, and little like side stuff like that. And eventually I got involved doing some sourcing projects with Brain Gain Recruiting. So Brain Gain Recruiting is, of course, the parent organization, the actual company behind the training certifications, as well as being a full service recruitment and sourcing and consulting firm and all that. So did some sourcing gigs with them, like off the books from my regular job, and eventually we said, "Hey, let's do this full time. Let's jump." So I did. I gave my notice and hopped in, and here I am, 6+ years later, still doing it. It's great. I mean, so much better than temp staffing.
What kind of roles are you then getting involved in the sourcing for?
On the BrainGate side, like we have a couple of different ways we go about it. I mean, we have our recruiting funnel, so we have clients that we full cycle recruit for as typical contingency recruitment, and we also have project-based sourcing services. So, hey, I need a long list for this project. I need some market research on this area. I need to know who are the what are the top video analytics companies in the Nordics, and who are their CTOs. Give me the list of all of those. So if clients come with all sorts of things, or sales managers for farming equipment in the Ukraine. I mean, we've had some crazy jobs. Well, we get a lot of interesting stuff from Eastern Europe, and especially like kind of Russia and that region, just because Irina has that background and speaks the language, and so she's somebody who, if you're in the U.S. but looking to talk to folks overseas in that region, she's kind of the obvious person to reach out to. So we get a lot of interesting requests from that part of the world, and that's always fascinating to me because I speak one language moderately well, but just the one. So it's always fascinating to me working in different parts of the world where I don't know the language, I don't even always know the alphabet, and try to figure out how to navigate the materials and find things in places where I don't even know what letters to use, much less what words, is always an interesting challenge. Like it engages me intellectually. Yeah. I really like it. So, but we do all kinds of stuff. So, if you have a tough sourcing challenge of any type, and anything from, hey, we'll sit down for an hour or two and just coach or work through a problem with you, or up to hey, we have this big project, can you come on board and help us jumpstart, build out those long lists, whatever. I mean, if it deals with recruitment or sourcing or research, we do competitive intelligence. We've done some, technology consulting. Can you look at our current tech stack for the sourcing recruitment and tell us, what else is good? We've done actually some really interesting stuff with like new vendors coming into the space. Like, they reach out to all the people who are known in a space and say, hey, can you look at our tool? Can you blurb our tool? Whatever. I mean, tons of people, I'm sure, get those requests, but I always like to do that because I just really love to sit down and take apart a tool and break it really badly, and then see if I can help fix it too. So those are fun too. So I mean, we're a small shop, right? It's just the three of us, Irina and Julia, who is our main recruitment practice leader, and myself, and we all just enjoy doing really interesting work. So it's like, the tough stuff, the things that are hard to crack. Yeah, well, I mean, the tough stuff is the fun stuff. When it's tough because it's a new challenge and no one knows how to do it. When it's tough because it's like a slog and kind of just menial, then not so much. Menial work is, I don't know, that's what the AIs are for, right? I mean, we don't want to do that.
What kind of tech stack do you work with then? Like, obviously doing a lot of different roles, then I'm guessing it's a lot of different tools.
My answer to that is so boring. So I know all these tools. I work with all these tools. I'm always checking out the new tools. I'm no Dean DaCosta, but I have my 500 extensions installed, but they're all turned off. I really rely heavily on Google and other search engines, and for the fast, easy stuff, I'll pop into LinkedIn. I don't use Recruiter that much. Regular LinkedIn is my main go-to, especially if I know the job is going to have. Well, if I know the population I'm sourcing from is going to be well represented there. If it's not, then Facebook is usually my first go-to. Between LinkedIn and Facebook is where I do a whole lot of work. Niche sites, depends what we're working on.
Mhm.
We do wind up working a lot in the tech space, so I'm on all the code sharing sites and that sort of thing. But as far as like actual tools, technology, I work manually most of the time. Like I'm copying and pasting and cleaning stuff up in Excel just because scraping is so finicky that unless you need to do it regularly off the same sites, the tools require so much maintenance. Like, you can go into your data miner and you'll build a recipe, assuming you can figure out their crazy recipe builder. And, the recipe breaks the next week because somebody changed the CSS label somewhere. And then you have to do it all over again. Or, I could just paste it into Excel and create some populate across rules, take column A and take the first three cells and map them across the row and just fill that down and sort it, and I'm done. And 5 minutes later, like I said, I'm good at Excel, so it's easy to do that for me. Anything where I have to like break my workflow or do something I'm unfamiliar with on a regular basis, especially if it's not worth the investment to build something out. Now, if I can build something out that I can use all the time, like I have some custom scraping stuff built out in Outwit that I use regularly because it was worth going and building and maintaining these things for. So I have some Facebook scrapes there and some more complicated GitHub scrapes, not the usual, like just look up an email stuff, but if I want to grab lists and things off of sites. And there's some association sites and like other niche social places where it's just kind of a pain to copy paste profile data out. So I build scrapers if I go there regularly. But I don't know. So I use whatever's handy. I try to pick the easiest tool for the job. No. So lazy gives the wrong impression, but what I like to do is the least work possible to get out the value, because if I'm spending a lot of time doing something manually, I'm wasting my client's time, I'm wasting my time. It's not good for anybody.
And you guys came out with SocialList as well a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about the tool and how it works, or what were the kind of use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So SocialList is a tool for building lists from social profiles, right? There is a thing when you're doing web development, these objects you can insert into your page to make it easier for search engines to map the data and understand the data in your site. So the big one there are schema objects, schema.org. You can go to and learn all sorts of boring stuff about how to organize information into different categories. But the short bit of it, or the more interesting thing of that, is that Google will let you search using these objects. So it'll just say, hey, only show me sites that have these objects embedded if you go in, not through the google.com, but through custom search engines. So if you build a custom search engine, you can limit results or filter results by these schema objects. And that lets you just find, say, people objects or business objects, and you can filter your search in very targeted ways. And each object has subcategories like, just show me people objects with email addresses embedded. Really good stuff. So it's a really novel way to search the web, and it's not available through most like typical search engines. So, building custom search engines is easy, but also kind of a pain. Like, it's easy to build a quick, simple one that does most of what you need, but the other 20%, really refining it can take a long time. They're hard to share. There's just not a lot of support from Google for the tool if you want to learn it on your own. And there's a ton of tutorials out there, and we've posted a bunch. We have a class about building your own. It's a really interesting field, and we still do a lot of that. But SocialList was meant to address, all right, if you don't want to do all this, but you'd still like to get all the value from these tools, well, what about just a simple interface? You can go in, enter stuff in search boxes, just like on, say, LinkedIn or a job board or ATS or whatever, titles and locations and companies, and do these really targeted really precise searches, but without all the hassle. You don't have to code anything. You don't have to figure anything out. You don't have to guess what the right keywords or fields are. That's all done for you. You just enter your search terms and move on with your day and find people and get your lists and export them. Hard to export from Google. So we built this really cool user interface that lets you do all the searches super easy. Predefined sites like LinkedIn and a bunch of other sites where you can go and just get all that public-facing profile data in a really easy, straightforward way, run extremely precise searches that are just returning exactly what you're looking for. No guesswork involved, not a lot of false positives. And then we added enrichment to it, so now you can do all that and get their email too. So you can build a long list, a reasonably long list, very targeted, grab contact details all at the same time, export it into an Excel or CSV, and use that wherever you're going to use it. So it's a really lovely tool. We actually built it in-house. It was supposed to be an in-house tool, but then we got to talking and said, well, if we slap a website up, we can just open this up to everybody. And, we decided to charge for it so we can cover the server costs. So it's, and there's a little bit of maintenance, so we do have to put some extra work into it. And it took a little time to really get it working exactly the way we wanted it to. We added another new feature this year in addition to the enrichments, which is a query optimizer, we call it, which is probably a really bad name for a really neat tool. You run your search, you get no or few results, and it automatically will take, say you put a specific term in the title box, and you get no results for it, or the company box, you get no results for it. It'll take that term, pop it back into a general keyword field instead, run the search again behind the scenes and say, okay, do we get more results this way? Do the results look better this way? And it'll play with that a little bit, and then a couple seconds later, it'll pop you to a new screen and say, all right, your first search returned almost no results. Here's a different search using the same keywords in a different way that returns a bunch more results. Take a look. Is this better? And the answer has pretty much been a resounding yes. It works very well. I don't know if it's the highest tech. It's not like crazy AI, like natural language processing. It's just moving things around the way you would naturally. As a sourcer, as a researcher, you type in one set of search terms, it doesn't work, you play with them a little bit until it does. So we have a tool that does that built into the system. So SocialList is our, I know it's Irina's number one go-to when she searches. I'm typically, when I'm doing sourcing projects, I kind of come in as the backup, or it kind of depends on the client and the project, but I would say Irina is our practice head for a lot of the research projects while I'm doing the training stuff. And so she will kind of say, all right, I did all the easy stuff, go find some more people, which, and I do the same to her on a number of projects. It's very balanced, but so it's not my, I would say it's not my go-to, only because I know she's already done it.
Yeah.
But as a company, it is our go-to tool internally for almost all of our projects. We use SocialList. So we dog food religiously. We are always using our own tools first. And we think everyone else should too. So check it out if you haven't. Free trial, 7 days. You get a bunch of enrichments attached. You can play with all the tools, see if it works for you. If you're the sort of sourcer who builds lists. If you're not, then okay. Maybe it's not exactly the right fit. But if you do, and I know many do, we recommend giving it a try.
What's something exciting that you've been working on or are working on, in the field that you're working on now?
Actually, a lot of what I've been working on lately has been figuring out marketing, because a big part of my day is on the training practice and that side of the business. So while I do work on the recruiting, while I work on the sourcing, while I work a lot on all the different tools and things that we try to release, SocialList, and we actually put out this email grabber tool, Chrome extension, which we built because Julia actually built it. She's our in addition to our head recruiter, she's our coder. A lot of the email grabbing tools were terrible, or scams, or tried to scrape all your Google analytics and watch all your activity. And we said, well, how about a non-spyware version that works better than the rest? And so we released one just because, so it's out there too. But for me, a lot of what I've been into is like catching up on all this growth hacking, marketing stuff. Like, how do you engage people? Because for me, while I won't say sourcing is a solved problem, I mean, or an automatable problem. I don't know where people get this crazy idea. Maybe they're paid to have this crazy idea by the vendors. But I've worked with a lot of the automated search and research and sourcing tools, and I do better than all of them, I would say. And I'm pretty good on time too, like when it comes to turnaround. So I don't use them, and I have trouble envisioning a world in which our job is done for us. But the next step, where I don't feel like I'm an expert yet, so it's interesting and it provides an opportunity to learn and grow, is the engagement, the outreach. Like, how do you get people to reply back to your messages? How do you engage people? How do you go the next step? How do you turn it from a list into a group of people who are engaged in some fashion? So it in a large part for me, that's actually from a sales perspective. I mean, I can get a list of recruiters. I have lists of recruiters that are hundreds of thousands of entries long, but how do you turn that into more? How do you engage them? How do you do stuff? And so that's a lot of what I've been working on, is answering that question. I don't know that I have all the answers yet. Like I said, that this is new for me. But I go out and I watch a lot of videos, I read a lot of blogs, and I try to think, just like in sourcing, where I'm always a big proponent of thinking like your target. All right, where are they going to be? Where are you going to learn about them? Where can you find them? Online or anywhere else, but mostly online, because I don't want to have to leave my house too much. Like, think like them. So I try to do the same thing in terms of the marketing side. Like, how do what would interest me? One big challenge for me there is that I don't think I'm typical, or apparently nobody's interested in the stuff I'm interested in. So the stuff that fascinates or engages me, I don't think engages as many other people. Small segment of the population, and a lot of stuff that interests other people. I don't care to really like the whole thing that Tris was doing, the growth hacking recruiters. I actually read his blog about it a year ago and then didn't follow up, and then I saw your episode with him, and I like that, and I didn't follow up. But I joined his group recently and was looking around in there, and I'd seen growth hacking stuff before, but I love it when people take all this information that's targeted at a different office and reframe it for me in the terms and context that I understand, and that lets me absorb it more easily. It's easier to synthesize, understand and take it and run with it. So, the big takeaways for me were, the way to engage people is to understand what their problem is and provide solutions, and provide interesting, relevant stuff, and do it regularly, and be really loud about it without being obnoxious, which is a balance.
That's the perfect balance, yeah.
Right. And I don't think you can hit. I certainly don't think I hit it, but I don't know if you can hit that balance all the time. But that's the goal, right? That's what you strive for.
We don't do a lot of research in our industry. There's not a lot of empirical research done. It's like, what works.
That is what I would love to do.
That's my ideal job as well. It's like, you have in the sales, you have all the kind of labs from InsideSales.com, from all the email providers. Everybody's doing this is what our data shows. And if I could just get access to LinkedIn's actual response data from their emails, things like that, we won't. But just A/B testing messaging, what works, what can we use, and all of that. It's that would be my ideal job, but it's not done in our industry, because it's just, we have a big industry, but we're in a niche of it, and
a niche of a niche of a niche, right?
Exactly.
I try to explain what sourcing is to people who don't even know what recruiting is, right? It's so consider a piece of a piece of a piece of HR. You know what HR is, right? Okay, yes, everyone's heard of HR.
Yeah, I try to explain it to salespeople. That mostly gets down well, because I'm we're your demand generation, marketing, and inside sales team. Okay, that they understand. It's I hand over qualified candidates like marketing would hand over a marketing qualified lead or a sales qualified lead from inside sales. And that they understand. And I take a lot of my tools from that. And it's also a lot of the research that's done is in the sales. But now I'm also looking at, the whole marketing piece. We haven't even touched on that. Like Trish was talking about that as well. He's like, I was recruiting these people, 10 years ago with fingerprinting and device, like things like that. And we're not using any of it in sourcing, but we're going to have to. But again, just doing research and finding out what does that work.
I love what you were saying with the research. I love that stuff. And whenever somebody posts, like, how does he pronounce it? Is it Joseph? Kadlec?
Yeah.
Okay. He posted his, like, these are the tools, the broken tools on LinkedIn. We went through and found all the code, and, these are the tools LinkedIn is, like, trying to block. And I know he hasn't really updated it a year and a half ago. That was great because he went in and dug out all the code and figured it out. In addition to his book and all, he posts a lot of great articles, and he did one of the first empirical studies of the efficacy of email finders, and a number of people have done them since, and I saw a more recent one too. But his was the first I've read, and I love that. Digging in and doing a kind of a deep dive. I think one of the big problems with the research, the studies, is that the stuff that's done for blog posts tends to be small sample size. Small sample sizes are, granted, I've taken like one stats class, but what I really remember is the bigger the sample, like the better your data, depending on your algorithm or whatever. And, if you're dealing with 50 emails, like what's your A/B test actually tell you?
Yeah.
If you're dealing with 50,000 emails, all right, well that's great. But how often are you going to send 50,000 emails about, I don't know, a CTO role or a data science role, or even a nursing role, like at an individual hospital? If you've got 1,000 candidates for any job you're working on that you would actually send an outreach message to, that's amazing. Like, to even have the opportunity to have that many people that you can message, much less like actually interact or collect data on. So it's really challenging. You need to find models that work with smaller data sets and can produce meaningful answers from smaller data sets. And I'm not nearly the information scientist to figure that out, but that's the stuff.
Like Lever tried to do a bit of that with some of the data they have from their, especially their nurturing tool. Like some of the tools are trying to do it, but I just know there is so much data that they have that from an industry point of view, we could learn a lot from without, you're not going to give away any secrets by looking at the data, but there's nobody doing that. And that would be the ideal if we could act, because I love listening to talks and I love listening to interviews, but I'm always like, okay, show me the data, because just give me the results is nice and fine, but show me the data because I want to see what's behind it, because maybe I can learn something else from that data.
That's how I evaluate like tool people, actually. Like, tell me about your data. I know there's some stuff you won't share with me, that's fine, but like, but I was talking to somebody about evaluating like tools for like contact refresh. So take your database or ATS, and so it's like, all right, here's my top five questions. How many records? How old are the records? How often do you refresh the records? What's your false positive rate? What's your false negative rate? If you can't answer those questions, even under NDA, then goodbye. Like, I don't care how cheap you are. Like, that's I need to know, because otherwise, how can I judge whether you'll be a good fit? Like, how can I judge? And the more, fine-grained the detail is. Like, okay, can you tell me now the same answers, but specifically for people who live in North America versus people who live in Europe? Can you do it country by country? Like, where's that?
Email finding tools. Like, when I was talking to Akbar Ali, it was the same thing. He's like, yeah, it's all nice and fine. We see all these tools coming in America and they work in Europe. He says, but I want to know if they work for what I do in India. And since most of the tools are not tested on India or to our reality, what he's working on is just like, okay, all of these tools, which one actually works on the reality that we have for most of the sources in India? And that's like, never thought about that, but that's the real research that needs to get like, okay, it works in US. to this extent. It works in Europe to this extent. It works in Asia and India to this extent.
Some of it's not terribly hard to do.
No,
I think
it's
and hopefully through interviews like yours, more of it'll come out. Like I'll have to go watch his interview to see what his answer was, what did work.
Oh no, he didn't have the answer. He was he's like, that's what I'm working on. That's
okay.
He's like, that's for me the exciting thing that I'm working on. Like
I hope he shares that. That'll be great.
He's like, I want to see what works for our reality and for my colleagues in India. I'm like, no, good point, because you don't think about that when you do a lot of North American or a lot of European recruitment. They're like,
and China or Japan or Korea. I mean, especially when you get into the different character sets and stuff. I mean, my goodness. One really obnoxious thing about a lot of Japanese and Chinese websites is when they translate their text into an image file and post blocks of image files containing the text. It gets rendered that way instead of like using Unicode, for example, which supports, your language now. That's like 10 years ago. We have these big commercial websites even where all the text is actually pictures, and I can't Google Translate a picture. Well, I mean, I can actually. There are tools for that now.
Yeah.
I think Yandex might even have like an OCR page translation tool, but that's really a hassle to use. I love, like I said, new interesting stuff, and a lot of the Asia Pacific area is a challenge to me. Again, the language and not really being familiar with the areas. So I love working on projects or looking into those areas because they're new. And a lot of the Middle East too is challenging as well, for different reasons. I think what's interesting is where are the data sources, right? All these, whether it's an email finder or aggregator or whatever, what are the data sources? For the folks in those regions who aren't on LinkedIn, who aren't on Sing, or who aren't, subscribing or aren't engaging with these tools we're familiar with, like where does the data lie? Where can even start to find that information?
No, I mean that we've seen that with Europe as well. For like, I've asked a lot of the,
well, Europe's a little bit better covered now, I think.
I mean, but do you, like, most of them? I always ask, like, do you support Sing? Like, well, yeah, no, and it's still.
Oh gosh, well, Sing isn't supporting anyone else either, right? I think they shut down their advanced search in lieu of their. I was just reading, I think it's Barbara Bramer who posted it recently. I think they just cut off the advanced search for paid users, and now you have to buy their recruiting tool to do advanced search, and so it seems like It's interesting that a lot of the tools seem to be more antagonistic to third parties now. I mean, there's a lot of third parties in the world. I mean, there's some really big companies in the third party space. Why you would build tools that are antagonistic to Fortune listed companies? I don't know. I think it's fascinating that there's such a mismatch between expectations, because I think a lot of the jobs out there get better represented by third parties than they do by the principals.
No, I think you're right as well. Like, Asia fascinates me, especially the likes of China. Very much that, like, where are people? It's like, okay, 99% of them are on WeChat. How do we get there? Like, first find out what is the channel, then we'll find out what the tool is. And then I think for China and a lot of the Asian market, like even talking to Tomoko, who's at Indeed in Tokyo, she was saying, well, they're all on LinkedIn because I need bilingual people. And if they're not on LinkedIn, then they're not bilingual. I need to know that they speak English. I'm like, okay, fair enough. She said the same thing with Korea. But then it comes back to the thing that isn't solved. It's like, how do you engage these people? And I think that's the channels that we really need to become experts in.
As a web researcher, a web-enabled researcher, let's say, I hate all those tools. They're fascinating, right? And I love them, and they're interesting, and I'm still trying to crack them. But how do you work effectively in terms of process with all of these walled gardens, all the chat platforms, right? I mean, Facebook is at least still sort of on the web.
Yeah.
LinkedIn is sort of on the web. Job boards are on the web. WeChat isn't on the web. Line's not on the web. All these other tools aren't on the web. How do you access them? How do you engage with people? Now, for all the reasons, privacy and all that, you can't just go in and search their member database. They're not enabled for that. They don't want that. Nobody using it wants that. how do you get in there? How do you engage with people? How do you find the groups? And it's interesting. Slack, same thing, right? I mean, you have Slack is hilarious to me because Slack is like, oh, it's a prettier version of what we did in the late '80s, early '90s. That's so funny. Someone could charge money for this thing. But yeah, it's really neat. How do you do that? And the answer is actually just so, I think, alien to the folks like me whose first impression is like, let's Google it, let's search it, let's find it. Is you have to go and well, fortunately, other people have the same problem in terms of if you want to grow your group, if you want to build a group on these platforms, you have to advertise, and we can find the advertisements. So that's one way in. But once you're there, or once you find one group, you got to follow the leads, track it down. It's more of an in-depth research, like an actual detective work process than optimizing a search string to like pull up however many results.
No, I mean, it's like, it's the good old fashioned network building. It's like you follow the breadcrumbs and you slowly build up a network.
I love these platforms, and they're fascinating and interesting. And I that's where the money's going. Everybody's putting money into these applications. There's
Mobile
tons of them.
ones, and
and that's where Silicon Valley wants the world to go. So that's where it's probably going to go for now. So we have to adapt to that. And we have to have a presence, and you have to start, that comes back to that sourcing, marketing, integration.
A lot of it is going to be around what Aaron is looking at. It's like the whole API calls, finding out like, what can I see from the software that's supposed to be on my phone? What can I see from the API calls that they're doing? What do they actually let me access? But that kind of setup is just, that's a completely new. I mean, we had to learn XPath to use our scrapers. Now we have to learn API calls in Android to actually access all of these networks. But that's what that's why I think it's going.
Yeah, it's funny because for a totally different reason, you look at things like Mike Basil, his Intel techniques, so like the OSN community and all that. So they wanted to bring their mobile tools onto the desktop because nobody wants to be using their phone for serious work because it's awful. So there are these like OSINT focused like toolkits to just pop up like Android and iPhone emulators and use all these tools on your desktop from your PC. And it's so neat that somebody did all that work in advance. I mean, not that they're always super easy to set up and virtual box or whatever, but like it's neat that they exist, that they're out there. And I think in addition to the marketing side in terms of engagement and building a presence, because having a presence just makes life easier, right? I mean, famous people, life is just easier. I mean, it's harder in some ways, but in terms of like getting attention, getting invited to things, getting people to come to you, having people reply to your messages, being famous opens those doors. And in a very small way, having a presence online in different communities and having, even just being there so people know you exist helps a lot. So building that presence from that marketing perspective. And then also, I think, borrowing from the research communities. And I've always thought and felt that, if I were building a sourcing team from scratch, a bunch of new hires, I'd probably try to hire out of, library science degrees and possibly, folks who do any sort of like, investigative, maybe criminal justice or people who always wanted to be a detective, right? Those types of folks, like those are the people to target, because I know how to research in a very informal way. Like these people know what research really is, and like why, but sourcers wind up being pulled from the same pools that recruiters get pulled from. Those random people who walked in off the street one day and hey, can you dial a phone? Like, be a recruiter, give it a shot. The vast majority of folks in our industry.
Exactly.
So I don't know. I love this blending of things. So I talk about interesting things that we're getting into. I don't think the deep dive into like finding people's like 500 usernames and passwords, like really doing a deep dive, like backgrounding of an individual person, makes any sense for sourcers. I think that's well beyond the pale of what we should be doing, not from a privacy perspective, that's a whole other conversation, but just from a time investment perspective. Like, you don't need to know the third grade teacher of this person who's one of 50 people you got to reach out to this week for a job that's one of 20 you've got to touch this week, right? I mean, that's nonsense. Nobody's paying for that. But being able to, leverage tools in a quick way to find like an email address or a phone number, or even
Another
just a
social profile that they don't use a lot, well, they don't publicly use a lot, but where you're going to get a response.
Exactly. Which is, I've been championing Facebook for sourcing and recruiting this year a lot. I think it's the place to be because, it's huge and, not everybody's there, but a whole lot of people are there. And it's not as polluted as as some of the other channels. There's a lot of people who you won't find through other channels. And you can free message anybody you want, which is fantastic. But we're going to kill it probably someday. And then we'll all have to figure out the next platform after that. No, but I really like this stuff. And I think what's important going forward, as our field matures is, kind of two things, right? We have to kind of keep in mind the core stuff, which is, probably thinking, right? I mean, or knowing how to go about a process. Yeah. We're trying to do a thing, which is, here's the goal. We want to find, 50 or 100 people who might be interested in doing this job or might know somebody who can do this job. And then being able to go through that whole process very quickly. Like, all right, it's it's a forklift driver in Tennessee, or it's a Java developer, in Helsinki. We need to know just off the top of our head, or be able to go to a place where we can find out very quickly. All right, where are these people? Yeah. What tool do I use for this? And then go and use it effectively to surface the information we want. And I think that makes a good sourcer. Not necessarily knowing all off the top of your head what's the right place to go for any job, but knowing the path to follow from A to B. And then, obviously being able to do all the little other odds and ends as efficiently as possible. And then, since there are very few, I guess we'd call them pure sourcers, since we all have to do outreach too and have the recruiting process as well, because why not, right? I mean, Googling can't take that long, right? You got time to make some phone calls, don't you, sourcers? Yeah, I mean, being good at that too, and all the other little things that sourcers get pulled into. So I don't know. I think that kind of those core fundamentals of being able to research and map out a process and follow it and learn things when you need to, and then of course the tools that'll help us, and knowing what those are and being able to effectively use them going forward is.
People want to keep in contact with you and see what you're working on. How can they best do that?
Google me. No, don't do that. Well, yeah, I mean, you can. There's nothing terrible, I think. It's just that actually my name's not that unique. There's like 30 of us, and some other people have much better SEO. And there's actually a guy who lives near me who has the same name who's not me. So you'll probably find him first. No, what I'd actually recommend is we actually just launched a newsletter over at Sourcing Certifications. So if you pop over to sourcingcertification.com, there's a button up there on the menu, newsletter, and we've got this great weekly newsletter we just launched. We have news and sourcing tips and links to our question of the week video that we just started recording. So we got 2 up now. We just take a sourcing question. How would you do this? How does this tool work? How would I find these people? The first one was, how do I find direct dials at a company, which is something we talk about in the Sourcing Hacks book. But the person had like a different use case or a different take on the same technique. How would they do it for their job, right? So we showed them how to do that. Just did one on how to find travel nurses, like through blog communities and stuff. So this is, I think these are fun to do, kind of a great way to break in to the video thing. But anyway, the newsletter, right? That's the way to keep in touch. Or I'm on Twitter, the Dave Galley, and I'm on Facebook, which is probably the easiest way to actually get a response from me. You can email me, whatever. David Galley Brain Gain or David Galley sourcing certification. By the way, if you're Googling me, that's the way to go.
Perfect.
Yeah, so all that stuff. But the newsletter, sign up. We'd love to hear, from you and keep in touch.
Well, thank you very much for your time then, David.
Take care. Happy New Year.
You too.